Hi, John McElroy, co-host of Autoline After Hours here. Before we start today's show, I'd like to ask a favor. We'd love to get your input about Autoline After Hours. What do you like about the show? What would you like to see more of? What would you change? We're also thinking of dropping the live portion of the program on Thursdays and just recording the show instead. What do you think? Drop us a line, would you? Send it to viewermail@autoline.tv. We know how much you all like the show, but we're always interested in how we can make it better.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion, and by Lear, a global leader in automotive seating and electrical systems.
This is Autoline After Hours with Gary Vasilash and John McElroy, episode 361 for January 19th, 2017. When car shows clash. Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific Time. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or on YouTube.
Here we are, another Autoline After Hours, Gary, but different kind of venue this time around.
Certainly not in the studio this time.
No, we're at the Industry Days of the Detroit Auto Show, coming to you from the Ford display. So apologies, people, you're going to hear a lot of racket in the background because this place is jam-packed, but so what? We got a lot to talk about the Detroit Auto Show for 2017.
Absolutely.
In fact, we got to let people know our friend and colleague, Murray Feldman, the business business editor from WWJ News Radio 950 is joining us.
Thank you, John, for having me here.
Cool.
It's exciting, all this activity going around for a good cause.
For a good cause. No, that's exactly right. But we should let people know that our guest for the first part of the show right now is David Madeira from the LeMay Museum. And
good to see
David,
you again.
even though you guys are out on the West Coast in the state of Washington,
yes, sir,
you got a direct tie-in to the Detroit Auto Show. Tell us about that.
We do. You know, we set out back in 2002 to create the country's largest automotive museum. I knew I didn't know anything about it, and I needed to come home to Detroit. And Bob Lutz helped me, and Rod Alberts at the show helped me, and we began to exhibit. And then a couple of years ago, he and I cooked up this new idea that you know about driving cars in the wintertime to the North American International Auto Show.
So tell us about which cars and from where and the whole 9 yards there.
So we took a 57 Chevy Nomad, a 66 Mustang, and a 61 Chrysler 300G. Wow. And this year we started in Boston, and we ran down the media markets. You know, we ran to New York, Philadelphia, DC, Pittsburgh, Indianapolis 500, or Indy Racetrack, Grand Rapids, Traverse City, and ran back across Michigan and came on in. 2,100 miles. And then we also had a 1917 Crane Simplex that John D. Rockefeller owned, new. And I drove that in Boston, I drove it in Newport, and then we drove it from Troy in to lead the procession in that 100-year-old car.
So you did this last year for the first time.
We did, yeah.
You call it the drive home. Is it because this is the home
of... It's all
of...
about celebrating. If automotive heritage is going to be celebrated, it needs to be done here. You know, I mean, it needs to be centered in Detroit.
David, what kind of response did you get in other cities? Is it like we feel here for these vehicles, these wonderful pieces of our history?
In Arlington, Virginia, 300 people came out on a Saturday morning in 150 classic cars in the dead of winter. You know, so that'll tell you something. And all along the way, smaller groups would come out because we just did it through social media, and 20 would come out. Last year, one guy drove all the way across America in his classic car with us. And there's just been that kind of response. It's really good.
How was the media reaction? I mean, you talked about the public, but as you did this media tour, was there demand for it?
There was. I think it wasn't quite as much in traditional media as last year, but there's been worldwide reach. CBS New York, we were on television there, 3 or 4 times during the day. Indianapolis, all the media was out. I guess the media was actually better than I thought when I think about it. Grand Rapids, all the media was out. Everywhere we went, television was out. Last year, I won't know the results yet, but last year we had, I don't know how many hundred stories, in Europe, in Australia, all the major newspapers in the U.S. I mean, including the LA Times, and not even on the route, you know. So it's, you know, I think people are fascinated that cars are supposed to be driven, and we still, even in the day of the autonomous vehicle, people still want to drive cars.
So, are these cars part of the collection at the LeMay, and how did you decide which cars you would take out to drive?
Well, when we did it, we wanted to celebrate Detroit American cars, and we have more than American cars in our collection, but we wanted to celebrate Detroit as a home of the automotive industry in this country. So we thought Ford, Chrysler, and Chevy. Well, what are you going to drive for a Ford? You're going to drive a Mustang. The Nomad, you know, 57, the coolest year for Chevy probably, right? And the Nomad, you know, was only made 3 years. And then the Chrysler is the 300's the flagship, and always has been. Yeah. So those three. Now we've done them 2 years in a row because they got a following. But next year we're going to do Muscle, and we're going to start in Key West because we need some warmth. Yeah. I know we're going to come north.
Yeah, maybe some snow tires too.
Yeah. It's interesting you said that in order to get the word out, you actually went on social media. And here are vehicles that are so non-social media.
I know.
I mean, the generation gap here is unbelievable, and it leads me to ask, what about the future? Are you concerned at all about all of the enthusiasts like yourself drying up, moving on, and then who's going to come and fix the cars, celebrate these vehicles?
Yeah. So one of the things, the museum is now under a parent company that we created called America's Automotive Trust. It's all about securing our heritage, and so it has a museum, saves cars. It has a new foundation called the RPM Foundation, which is Restoration, Preservation, and Mentorship. So we're giving young people full-time scholarships to go to the few schools in this country that keep the skills alive about building cars and restoring cars. And then we're putting them in apprenticeships with master craftsmen because they're all dying. And so we want the knowledge to pass on. Then we have another organization called Club Auto, and we're partnering with Hagerty, and we're creating opportunities for people to drive cars around the country to keep enthusiasm there.
Wow,
and then we'll focus as the autonomous car is there. We get the need for it, but we want to make sure they don't forget that there will always be some of us, if we do our job, who are going to want to drive the car. So, I mean, shoot me if I can't. You know, I'm not gonna go dying in a pod.
So were you behind the wheel of one of these cars?
Yeah, last year I did the whole trip in the Mustang. It was having some issues. It would conk out in intersections. We resolved that, but I didn't want to trust anybody else, you know, panicking.
Right.
And this year I drove the Mustang some, and then I drove the Crane Simplex because,
you know, it occurs to me that we've become so used to nice, compliant rides, and those cars didn't have them. I mean, how did you feel at the end of the day?
I love it. Yeah. Maybe I'm different, but I actually get energy from it. You know, because, and you all know, I mean, you know how visceral it was, you know, to deal with a car then, and we're so insulated now, as you said, you know, but the visceral experience of driving, and especially in the Crane, it was 4 below, open car, you know, and it was great. I mean, you live off adrenaline, I think.
Yeah. We survived that back when, so we can survive it now.
Yeah.
I'm interested with what Murray asked you about of this new generation. I think it's terrific how you're helping train a new generation to be able to restore and keep these cars running. But my question is, what about an interest amongst a millennial generation that soon may not even have to drive, that aren't even that interested in cars? What's going to happen, whether they come and visit your museum or whether the car collection part of the business keeps going strong?
I think if I knew the answer, I'd be a rich man because I think we're all searching for it. I'm worried about that. My own daughter, my eldest daughter, is 36, never owned a car till she was 35 because she became a parent. And, you know, now you need to transport kids. So somewhere there's always going to be the need for the automobile, but that passion that we all grew up with, I don't know. It's just like, you know, my boys don't love baseball to the same level that I love baseball because there's too many activities going on.
I know the people at Hagerty Insurance have told me that they're seeing a lot of interest in cars from the 80s and even 90s.
Good.
Because every generation wants to buy the car that they knew as a kid and lusted after, right? And so it's that generation. Yeah. But I'm wondering, you know, will the cars from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s appeal to a generation that really didn't know much about them except in museums or at a dream cruise or driving to the Detroit Auto Show?
And it's a serious question. All the guys who have invested a lot of money in those cars because they're all going up, you know, when's the tipping point for them? Those values are softer. No doubt they're softer on the 20s and 30s. Hagerty knows it better than we do. They're really the experts. Right. I think it's a real serious issue. It's part of why we get the old cars out on the road. And I will tell you that Crane Simplex driving around through Boston, young and old would stop and go, oh my God, you know, and photographing it. We got to keep them out there so it's part of their experience. And somehow we got to make it part of their experience or it will be just gone. You're right.
Did they perform well on the road in general? I mean, mileage, I don't even want to ask about mileage, but that's, you know, that's not what this is about.
No, last year we didn't have one mechanical issue all the way across. Went over 11,000 feet, Loveland Pass in the snow, no issue. This year we had a couple of flat tires, which none of us experience flat tires anymore, but remember we used to.
Sure did.
So,
in fact, cars don't even come with spares in many cases. That's how rare a flat's starting to become.
Yeah. So we had to deal with that. The Mustang, in dealing with Manhattan traffic, all of a sudden lost all its transmission fluid, you know, and we had to replace it, and there was nothing wrong. It just got too hot and blew it out somewhere.
When you're on the road like that, is it difficult to do that?
Is it what?
When you're on the road like that, is it difficult to do that, replace something?
You know what's really incredible? One, we have a support vehicle and a good mechanic. But the enthusiast community comes rallying. You know, I mean, they seriously do. I mean, we needed brake shoes on the Chrysler, and I made a phone call, and somebody knew a guy in a barn. I drove an hour back in a car and bought brake shoes out of this little place and took them, and another enthusiast, this is in Jamestown, Rhode Island, said, hey, I've got a lift. These people were meeting us for lunch that they learned through social. I got a lift. So we went to his garage, put it up on a lift, and we changed the brake shoes. Oh, that's great. And we had more than one experience like that. So it hasn't been too difficult.
That's a lot of nice people.
So you run a museum, you have a vast variety of automobiles there. Do you discern a pattern of development that you may see reflected as you're walking around the Detroit show here in terms of what this time represents vis-a-vis something back in the 20s or back in the 30s?
Well, you know what interests me? I was just talking to Ed Wellburn about it, and the biggest exhibition response we ever had so far, we're only 5 years old as a museum, was the F-Series pickup truck.
No kidding.
And he and I were talking about if we did a Suburban, which goes back to the 30s, we'd get a huge response too. And I think no matter what they're talking about today, about all the different kinds of cars, electrics and hybrids and everything else, what are we selling most of? We're selling pickup trucks and big SUVs. You know, Americans still somehow need and want those vehicles, in spite of everything else that's going on. So, I mean, if theirs seems to be a consistent thread. My daily driver is a pickup truck. I have a Porsche, but my daily driver is a pickup truck.
But certainly an F-Series from back in the day compared to an F-Series that's on the stand here are complete night and day.
Vastly different, yeah.
Size, look, and capability.
Comfort, yeah.
Fascinating.
So next year, muscle cars, huh?
Muscle cars, Key West. We got some great stuff with Michelin and Shell that we'll be doing, and Monte Cristo, which is the official cigar of America's Car Museum. They're going to throw a party for us down in Lauderdale, and we'll have a lot of fun coming up. You guys ought to come down and drive up with us.
There you go.
And do the show from there.
Yeah. Real good. Well, David Madeira from LeMay Museum, thanks so much for stopping by and telling us what you're up to these days.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity. It's great to be in Detroit. I love this city, and it's fun to be here. So, thanks.
Good deal, man. Really appreciate it.
Good to be with you guys.
Got it cool.
Okay.
Thanks.
Safe travels back.
Thank you.
Welcome back to After Hours here at the Detroit Auto Show 2017 at the Ford display. I got my sidekick co-host here, Gary Vasilash. Murray Feldman has joined us. David Madeira just stepped out, and now we got Karl Brauer, the executive publisher at
Auto Trader and Kelley Blue Book.
Okay, I got that
Close
enough. So, yeah, let's talk about the show and what you guys think of what's going on. Karl, kick it off. What's your reaction?
Well, you know what I liked about this show was the diversity, meaning there wasn't one type of new car to talk about, like SUVs, which we're kind of tired of talking about, even though they're still popular with the consumer. There were a lot of SUVs here, but there were also a lot of important sedans here. There was some cool environmental information here. There was a nice, pretty major mid-cycle refresh for the F-150 going on here. So it didn't feel like a one-dimensional show, and I think that's what made me happy about it.
There was a concern, John, you were at CES, I was at CES, Karl, you may have been, I don't know. And there was always this concern that does the Detroit show lose as a result of that show? And I was a little trepidatious coming here, but I agree with you that, there's stuff here.
Until I got here, I was kind of thinking that might be going on, but it didn't prove to be true.
But you know what, and what you mentioned there is the technology, and it's really not as much about the new styles that will wow the audience when you get here at the show. It's all about the new technology. So many things that you can't see, but you'll feel, and eventually they get us one step closer to the autonomous car. And as we do that, it improves the safety of the driver, the safety of the passenger. There's so much of that to see right here at the show in so many of these new models.
Yeah, I'm going to take a contrary view. I think Detroit is losing to CES. I think the show, from a new car intro, there's interesting things to look at here. There's important stuff to look at, but there's no wow factor. There's not like, say, the Ford GT, which is on the floor again here this year. But last year, that was a showstopper. Everyone was talking about that. Yeah. I don't see anything at this show that everybody is saying, stop the presses. This is what everyone should be focusing on.
It's funny you say that, John, because I was talking to the Kia guys last night, and I said, no offense, guys, but who would have thought that Kia would be making the biggest news at a Detroit Auto Show? But I think all of us would agree. The most unexpected and, interesting car at this show was the Kia Stinger. It was the only vehicle at this show that really seemed to kind of move the needle for an automaker, That they've never done a car like that before, a rear drive, kind of almost entry luxury car that's probably going to make an A3 or an A4 and a BMW 3 Series seem expensive when it comes out, but it's still going to offer very good styling, rear driving dynamics, rear and all-wheel drive. It's a whole new world for Kia, and it debuted here in Detroit, and nothing else at this show really was like a wow factor.
Although it has some great, I was going to say it has great style.
Yeah, but the thing that strikes me though is that this is a place where people come to see cars they may buy. So we saw the debut of the 8th generation Camry, and we saw the debut of the 5th generation Honda Odyssey. Both giant selling vehicles, so maybe it's the bread and butter with a little sugar on top, like the Stinger.
Yeah, well,
but other than that,
Odyssey, 5 Series, LS, those aren't huge volume sellers, but they're still core elements of those brands. So there were a lot of important cars here, that showed up.
No, I would agree with that, and I think the public is going to be wowed by this show. I'm talking as a member of the media.
Yeah.
I'm just not seeing the buzz, and I'm not the only one saying this. This year, there was one day of OEM car company press conferences. I think there were only 14. They were over by the middle of the afternoon.
Right.
Yeah.
That's never happened at this car show before. It used to be 2.5 days, then it went down to 2 days. Now it's down to almost not even a full day.
So there's the tug of war between Detroit and, if you will, Silicon Valley, and who's going to win out. A lot of the, as you said, at the CES, that's where a lot of the headlines came. Fiat Chrysler made headlines there. It's still carrying over right now in their stock value. Hit a new high today,
Is that right?
As we are recording this program. So you see that happening there. You see a lot of headlines coming from there. Some of the headlines that came from here are about building new plants and bringing people to work in America. I think every single foreign car maker, Volkswagen, Honda, Toyota, they were all Nissan talking about its commitment to America, its jobs, its investment, the billions it's going to spend. Nobody's saying the M word or the T word, unless it's a reporter asking about that. But there's nothing really, you know, these are all plans for the future, and these would often take a back seat to the vehicles that were on the floor. This year, it doesn't seem to be. The headlines are all about what's up here, and what the vision is, and the vision for the future for the automobile industry.
Now you're right, Murray, and it's fascinating too, because when you've been at the CES show just a week earlier, that also somewhat taints your impression, you know, because I don't know if I've been at a show that has more buzz and more energy. I mean, it's almost like kind of scary, actually. If you're standing in the wrong place, you hope you don't get stampeded. I mean, that show is overrun, and it keeps getting bigger. They keep taking up more space, and it's still not enough space for it. It still feels like it's bursting at the seams. And when that show happens only 4 days, 3 days before this show starts, and you see one full day worth of news being made here, and that show's like a week, and it feels like it's not enough.
Although we got to be, for the viewers and listeners who are not familiar with CES, I mean, it used to be known as the Consumer Electronics Show. There are a whole bunch of TV sets like may be seen behind us right now. I mean, and there's a lot of things that are completely non-automotive.
Nothing to do.
That said, I mean, there are, BMW built a structure, Delphi had a structure, and many car companies did. But as you were mentioning, Murray, that FCA is still doing well. They showed a concept car, the Portal, which pretty much looks like a Pacifica that's been shrunk a little bit. It was designed by millennials, for millennials, and they made a big deal out of that. Faraday Future showed its production model. I mean, so
and Lucid Motors.
And Carlos Ghosn had a keynote address.
So did Mark Fields.
And so did Mark Fields, and they talked about automobile, mobility, the future.
And John Krafchick had a
big Waymo thing. Well, he did that here and out there. He was talking. So the shows, you know what I was saying last night. I was at dinner last night with a couple other industry folks, and I said, what maybe would work better for Detroit would be to do their show in like September, October. It would be
any time out of the winter.
It would be a much better reflection on this state and how beautiful it is.
I mean, that 4 inches of snow we got yesterday was.
It would get away from CES, and they would actually then be the kind of the first show of the annual show schedule, right? I mean, you have Tokyo and Frankfurt alternate every year, September, October. So they just need to figure out a month or a week in there that those shows never fall on. It's always kind of toward the end of 1 month or middle, whatever. And I think if Detroit did their show then, they'd get away from CES. They'd have better weather here to show the world what this part of the country's like, and I think it would just reflect more. I think the show would all of a sudden get a lot more power.
But wasn't the show founded to boost sales during the winter months, during the January and February area of the calendar? I mean, isn't that what this was originally meant to do?
You're exactly right. You're exactly right, Murray. Because this show, like any auto show in the United States, is run by car dealers. Elsewhere in the world, it's run by a convention center and/or it's run by the industry. This is the only place in the world that I'm aware of that it's run by the car dealers. And you're exactly right. That's why they wanted it in January, the dead of winter.
Right.
But that's also before it was an international show.
Right.
And before we tried to bring in people from all over the world, especially media. And you're right, Karl. In the nice weather, this area is beautiful. But it was incredibly cold on Monday. Yesterday, as Gary just alluded, we got 4 inches of snow dumped on us. People took hours to get in here. It was so cold and windy outside, the smokers didn't even want to go out for a cigarette.
No. That was that bad, yeah. No, and someone else had mentioned that when I said that. They said, but what about the dead of winter? Let's give the locals something to do and go see and look at cars to dream about buying and all. Maybe do both. Maybe make a very industry-oriented show, September, October, and still do whatever they want to do with consumers if they want to, but then have a much more consumer-oriented, show off the new models that consumers want to buy in January. Maybe that would even be better for the dealers. They get 2 shots at showing off the things.
And Karl, the statistics do show that I think it's 50% of the people who come here are influenced by what they have seen when they make their decision to buy, which is usually within the next 12 months.
Yeah.
So it does work for the consumer.
Powerful consumer.
But those of us in the industry and those of us who report on it want to see the excitement too.
Well, one of the things that occurs to me is, John, you mentioned that there used to be more days of previews, and it used to be Sunday afternoon, the
concept car day.
Cars were out, right? But then 2008, 2009, when the industry just went into the tank, it seemed to be the end of concept cars as we know them, right? I mean, then the concepts were essentially production intent vehicles,
Right.
And I wonder if we're getting to the point where possibly the industry doing so well, I mean, it finished a record year, that maybe if that came back, and maybe if Detroit had the concept cars again, that would have more
that would help pull
something.
Well, and that's why I say maybe they do something September, October. There's more concept cars. There's more further out looks at what's going on that we, car geek, media geek people care about. And then they do something that's more consumer, real world. Go out and buy something at your local dealer in the next, 6 weeks to 6 months. That's maybe still in the dead of winter when it's a good time for the consumers to have a break from the cold and come in here.
Look, you got to get it away from CES.
Yeah.
And here's the real reason why, too. On top of everything we talked about, all the car companies have terrible stock multiples. If they could just get to the average of the stock market, their price of their stock would double.
Yeah.
So what do they want to do? They want the tech media reporting on all the great new businesses that they want to get into. If the automotive media reports about it, whatever.
Right.
They're still perceived as car companies. They want to be perceived as tech companies. They're going to bring their best stuff and their best people to CES. And if we here in Detroit are just a few days later, we're going to get clobbered.
Right.
You talked about how big CES is in Vegas.
Oh.
It's the biggest show in Vegas.
Yeah.
It is the biggest convention in the biggest convention town in the country, maybe even in the world. It's the 800-pound gorilla. The Detroit show is not going to push CES around. It's the other way. And this never mattered before. 3 to 5 years ago, no one cared. You'd go to CES and, somebody's got a new woofer. Or, somebody's got,
a big screen TV.
But I'm saying automotive stuff.
Well, it wasn't that many years ago when Audi had the headlamps that were like, woo,
laser headlamps.
Laser headlamps, woo, that was not
it's such an important automotive. I mean, look at even though automotive is a small part of CES and it's gigantic, it's a small part of CES, the headlines, the media reportage coming out of CES was overwhelmingly automotive.
It doesn't
Well, it
feel
was
like
this year, yes.
It doesn't feel like you can I would never think you could overpower Las Vegas's ability to handle a convention. It feels like the city is not able to handle infrastructure-wise CES. That's how big that show feels. And
That's a good point too. I was not at CES, but I followed your reports and the coverage, and it seemed like what we were talking about is a lifestyle of events. And under the umbrella is maybe the automobile over here, maybe the washing machine over here. I mean, during CES, Whirlpool of Michigan decided it was going to announce that it would use some of the same voice technology in its washing machines that we use in the automobiles right now.
Right.
So you can tell it, wash it light, cold water, and the washing machine will do that. Just like we get in the car and we say to the car, put on whatever station, or do this, or drive there, or call John McElroy, and we call him.
Might get a call from his washing machine, be careful.
Yeah. That's right. That's where the Internet of Things goes maybe a little bit too
Internet
far.
of Things, absolutely, that's what it is.
Hey, look, let's take another quick break right now. We got a lot more. Let's talk about some of the things that we did see here on the show floor.
There was a show here.
And there's good stuff, but I think it's important to talk about this battle, this war between CES and Detroit. But hey, don't go away, folks. We'll be back in just a moment.
Lear Connexus offers a parental controls application with geofencing that sends notifications regarding driving behavior and location, including curfew alerts, acceleration alerts, and speed alerts. All delivered to a smartphone application that includes vehicle location, driver notifications, and a report card of driving history, including notifications when predefined geographic boundaries are crossed. For more information, visit Lear.com.
We're back with Gary and Murray and Karl and me. So, Murray, have you had a chance to walk around the show? Any cars stand out in your mind?
Times.
Okay.
A couple of them for different things. First of all, you were talking about Kia, Karl, and the styling, Stinger. That's great. And when you think of Kia / Hyundai, they have often come out with some style that dazzled everybody. And a lot of it, way back when, came from big three designers who they hired from Detroit and from Warren, Michigan, you know who I'm talking about, to go out there and design and just be creative. When it comes to like communications and technology on board, the Odyssey, when you can actually interrupt your kids in the back seat as they're doing something else with a headset and tell them some information that they need to know, like we're going to stop soon on a long trip. You know, that's a pretty cool thing, and I think all families could probably relate to that. And then, don't get on me for this, but I love the Volkswagen bus. You know, the bus of the 50s and 60s brought back a new electrified, you know, the ID Buzz.
That may be the one buzz vehicle at the show, is the VW concept electric van that looks like one of the old Volkswagen buses.
They say you could sleep in it, but will anybody buy it, and will they really make it?
Well, you know what's interesting about, when I saw that vehicle, you know what struck me was, remember, Volkswagen was really suffering in this country once before. They almost, I heard, the legend I heard was that there was one meeting away from pulling out of the US market back in the 90s because they were struggling so much. And there was a board meeting, and they were basically, in this meeting, we're going to decide whether we stay or go in the US. And they decided to stay. And that was around like 94, 95. And then right after that was when we saw the Concept 1, which was the Beetle. You know, and we saw it in concept form.
Debuted here.
Yeah, and it got a huge reaction. And within a few years, the new Beetle came out in '98, and that car ultimately didn't prove to be one of their biggest sellers over long term, but it absolutely revived the brand's image in this country because it resonated with so many people who remembered the original Beetle. Volkswagen could use another, resonant vehicle in their lineup that would remind people of the warm, fuzzy Beetle, warm, fuzzy Volkswagen feelings from the past. That bus would be a good move on that.
You know what, the incident that you're talking about back in the late 90s, I remember, I don't know if you were there, but you couldn't get in to see them unveil it. It was unbelievable, and a lot of it was very hard to understand because it was German, and everybody was there and they were taking pictures, and when I say that people were like this, I mean, I had a
like
crew
sardines.
with me, and we were like sardines sitting on the floor, still broadcasting live because everybody wanted to see the thing. And that's what, boy, when you can get that kind of hype, you can write your own ticket.
Right.
If you don't go astray in the future, which is another story.
All right, so I want to take your three vehicles. Okay, so the Kia Stinger, and while the styling is, I'll admit, rather exaggerated, I want to know where the C-pillar came from on that car. I mean, it's the most giant C-pillar I've ever seen on a sedan in my life. It's just crazy. And number two is, why do they have that car? I mean, you mentioned earlier.
I'm with you, Gary. I think the Stinger is an answer to a question nobody asked, at least not in the U.S. market.
Right. I mean, it's
a sedan. Aren't sedans really hot right now?
Yeah.
What sedan?
Somewhere.
So, as hot as the Cadenza and the K900.
Exactly.
That's how hot they are.
That car's going to follow right in their footstool.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It is unfortunate. You know, I look at that car, and then of course my first thought though when I saw that car is I said, okay, there's another Korean brand out there called Hyundai, and it just launched its luxury brand called Genesis with 2 sedans.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's tough to sell sedans right now in this market. It just is, and I don't know if, I don't think we're ever going to see sedans disappear by any means, but the idea that you would kind of pin your hopes to a sedan in today's market just doesn't seem like a good idea.
And if you remember last year, Kia showed a concept pickup truck.
Yeah.
Yes. So they might, okay, the Odyssey, okay. Now, the Pacifica won the North American
Truck of the Year, or
Utility of the Year,
yes.
right? So, clearly breakthrough design. I'm really surprised that Honda didn't go further with the Odyssey.
Well, you're right. From a styling point of view, it doesn't really hit, and from a features point of view, it's got all these like kind of high-tech features, and no single one of them would blow you away, but there's like 5 of them that are unique to the car that no one else has right now.
Yeah, look, I've never been a fan of the styling of the Odyssey. I think the new one is hideous.
Really?
But man, do they sell a lot of them. I'm not knocking the van, and styling is subjective. I hate it.
Wow.
Okay. And then the ID Buzz, which is the name of the concept that VW has. And so this is their vision of an electric vehicle and an autonomous vehicle. So it has both of those capabilities built in, and they're talking about how it's built on the new modular electric architecture. And in 2020, they're talking about having a vast array of electric vehicles.
If they have any money left after all these fines to buy those things.
So So the thing I wonder about is that, okay, I think everyone and their mother would remember what a Beetle was, but how many people remember the microbus?
I was surprised. I mean, I was never a microbus fan at all, but of course I think it was before my time. I'm not a huge, Grateful Dead guy, so I guess maybe I just missed out on why that vehicle is so cool. But I'm hearing from a bunch of people. I've heard from multiple people in my social circles. Oh my gosh, look at this thing. Is this happening? If you get one of these, you gotta let me know.
Okay, but demographically, where are they?
Well, one of them is younger than me, believe it or not, but I think he's kind of a throwback too,
But remember, the Cars movie, the animation that Pixar did.
Yes.
There was a Volkswagen bus character in that. George Carlin did the voice on it.
Yeah.
So now you've got this whole young generation. These are younger than millennials who know that a Fiat 500 with Guido is really cool, that this VW bus with the George Carlin voice is cool.
Yeah.
So I think...
How's it working out for the 500?
Well, those people are still too young to buy one yet.
All right, so those are the three. So,
well, no, I'd say no, that's great. But I like them for different reasons. I did not like the Odyssey for the style, but I like, some of the technology in there and some of the little extra components and stuff. And
I thought it's a great van.
I thought the ID Buzz. I mean, I remember that from my childhood.
Yeah.
And so it was just cool to see that kind of thing.
Right.
And I remember when they brought the Beetle back, it was this nostalgia era that, as we discussed earlier, that really brought a lot of attention to it. Maybe there will be enough attention that they'll make the thing, but I don't know how many people really remember it who would buy it.
Volkswagen needs an injection of passion for their brand.
Boy, do they
I don't know what else. They can't. I don't think they can get it again off another Beetle, but the bus might do it.
So an interesting fun fact is that the Beetle was originally known as the Type 1, and it was followed by the microbus, which was known as the Type 2. So maybe they're going to go for some lightning with that car. Not Lightning McQueen.
A couple of other cars I think that people ought to take a look at is the Audi Q8.
Yep.
Because it's a concept, quote unquote concept. All they did was pull the door handles off it, is what I can tell, and put 23-inch wheels on it. So put the door handles on, imagine it with 22s, and you know what it's like. But it's important to look at because that is the new design language of Audi going forward, especially with their grille. Another car that I think looks terrific here is the Infiniti QX50. And I really like the way that Infiniti finally is starting to mature in styling, because before I thought it was ungainly, the proportions
So this is a crossover concept.
Yeah, thanks for that. Right. So those are two that I think are worth looking at.
Yeah, I talked to Roland Kruger, the head of Infiniti, on Monday, and he was really jazzed about the QX50 because he does feel like everything from a styling to a technology element of that vehicle really points the way for that entire brand going forward, and he's very excited. And I think Nissan, Carlos Ghosn had some great talking points at CES last week, and I liked how they had the idea of some of the ways they'll implement this technology. We keep hearing about autonomous technology in kind of a theoretical point of view, but Carlos Ghosn and Nissan is starting to talk about it from a application. How will it roll out? How will it actually work for people when it hits? And that tells me they're more serious about making it work.
Hey, another thing we got to talk about is GAC, Guangzhou Automotive, is here on the floor of the show. They don't sell anything in the United States, but the fact that they're on the main floor here tells me they sure have this market in mind. I wonder what you guys think.
Well, we've seen it before. We've seen them come and predict that they were going to be here within 12 to 16 months, and it never happened. Not necessarily that company, but somebody of the others. I think at one point there were 4 or 5 here at the show from China. We'll see what happens. They did get a lot of attention during their presser.
Yeah, so one year they were out in the lobby, right?
Yeah.
And then another year they were all downstairs, and
They're getting closer.
yeah, they're just like right over there.
Now they're on the show floor.
Clearly they're trying. So, what is your sense whether a Chinese brand would sell in the U.S. market?
Whether they would sell in this market?
No, whether they could sell.
Yeah, I think they'll sell because people will buy anything. I don't know how many numbers they're going to sell, But I think that we live in a day and age where, especially with the young people getting acquainted again with the automobile, if their app is telling them that it's a good buy, they will do that. I heard a story about somebody who was looking for, I hate to say it here, but it was a Ford vehicle, and another dealer heard about it who sells Hyundai, and this person would have never considered a Hyundai. But he said, hey, listen, I heard you're looking for that Ford. I can give you this, and it'll be a lot less expensive. Boom, he has it, he loves it. I understand. So I think that there would be people who would look at that thing. In this market, probably not as much as in another market. East Coast, West Coast maybe. This market, it might be a tough sell.
And I agree, Murray, but I think you're 100% right that it would have been very hard for China a Chinese automaker to sell in this market even 5 to 10 years ago. But the demographics are changing. We've got enough millennials out there with buying power. They're younger. They aren't as set in their ways. They're more open. If they get news that something's good, they're kind of done. They don't need a 30-year history of it already existing in this country or even being from this country. I did like to see them on the actual show floor. But I remember seeing Geely and or Cherry at this show.
Right, both of them.
A decade ago.
14 years ago,
right.
They were down by the Joe Louis statue back then and all, but they've been at this show for over a decade. And remember at some point there was a wolf in The Boy Who Cried Wolf, but how long before we're actually going to see, a car show up here from China? We've been hearing about it for years.
Yeah, and what's the quality really like in those vehicles? Quality has always been a problem for cars that are Chinese made when you put them into this market.
Yes, and these cars looked pretty good, at least at a quick glance. One thing I noticed standing under the harsh lights of the auto show was the paint on the one. It was like, boy, this one really needs like a color correction from one of the good paint shops out there, because these auto show veterans, companies veterans, no, you don't let a car onto the show unless the paint is perfect, because every little scratch shows up, and the one was just like, ugh.
Well, remember, Guangzhou is a company that builds cars for Chrysler in China. It builds cars for Honda in China. So it's got these relationships with well-established companies. And I'll bet at least the cars they build for them are probably very close to equal to the quality of what you'd buy from anything made here or in Europe or in Japan for that matter. I think they're coming. I think they want to be in this market. Some of it's to hedge, just in case everything goes south in China in a big way.
Yeah.
And I think you can make way more profit in the United States of America than you can in China, even though their car market's bigger. I think we're going to see a number of them here, and I think we'll see them selling cars, retailing cars, before this decade is out.
I think you might be right, John.
Okay, so there's a new Chevy Traverse. What do you guys think of that?
Well, to me it's interesting. The front end styling reminds me a lot of the Malibu. And the Chevy guys were telling me, wow, this really ties in with the truck face of our lineup. And I'm thinking, I think it looks like a Malibu to my which I think is a good thing. I think that's a smart way to do it. Yeah, I think the Malibu is a brilliantly designed car. I think it's very handsome. So, but that's my initial reaction to the Traverse.
Okay, GMC, new terrain. So, 3-row, 2-row.
It's another evolution of a vehicle. It's great, it's nice when you look at it, but does it really dazzle you at all? I mean, I don't know.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Murray. I mean, it's like, they got to update these cars. We know they got to update these cars, so they updated it, and it looks fine, but there's nothing really new and exciting going on there. I think the car maker's point of view is all it needs to be is an SUV, and it doesn't have to be new and exciting. It'll sell, So, they're always smart to invest as much as it takes to keep a car hot in the marketplace. You don't have to invest a lot in an SUV right now to make it hot in the marketplace.
Part of it is it's a problem with GM's success. When you're a challenger, when you got to stand out from the crowd, you take more risks.
You work harder.
Especially from a styling standpoint.
Yes.
Once you get successful, it's like, whoa, don't rock the boat, Charlie. And so let's play it a little bit safer here. And I think I'm starting to see that in vehicles like the Traverse, like the Terrain, like the Acadia.
Yeah.
Not quite as bold a statement as they were before.
Yeah.
There are some untold stories here too. I mean, Buick is just sitting over there on its own, but Buick has a great story to tell. You know, they're winning awards for safety. They're winning awards for customer satisfaction. Sales, 70% of the people buy it again. 24% of the people who buy the small SUVs are new to the brand. Yeah. You know, you can't write a story that's better than that. But yet, Buick doesn't have a big splash here. They've got their vehicles, and I think they're going to get a lot of attention here because people are interested in the brand. But we didn't hear a lot from them. Lincoln is another one. This is the first year Lincoln has not done a great big show. But they didn't have anything to show except what they showed last year, and it's out here, and it's the Michigan-made Flat Rock, thank you, Continental, and it's done well, and it's increased their market share,
cool
giving them the best year in, 8 or 9 years?
Yeah.
So why didn't Lincoln have anything new?
Because they didn't want to show it here. They do have an all-new, all-aluminum Navigator coming.
Yep.
They didn't show it. Now, right over here is the Ford EcoSport that's not going to be on sale for a year and a half, but it's on the floor here, whereas the Navigator, which will be on sale this year, is nowhere to be seen. My guess, they're saving it for Chicago, probably New York. Yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, and you know, the car companies do that too. They always have to look at the show schedule, they got to look at their product schedule, and they got to make it all fit, you know, and so they can't use everything up in Detroit and have nothing left for the other shows in the year. But I do agree that I would have liked to have seen more from Ford on some level at this show. They had a lot of technological discussions going on, but you know, we didn't actually see a Bronco or see a Ranger or see a Navigator here. So, you know, we'll see what happens for the rest of the year.
So FCA had nothing new here. Is that a surprise?
Totally. Well, I mean, they had their concept car from CES.
Yeah. That's, you know, it was left over, but they did that last year with LA. Was it last year, the year before? They brought out a vehicle in LA, and then they brought it here.
Didn't do anything else.
It was a sedan.
Yeah.
And they didn't do anything else with it. Maybe they didn't have to. They got great headlines. They got great press, especially with the announcement that what they're going to do with the Jeep line and make more of them here, and the Toledo, and the $1 billion of investment here. I think it worked for them just as well as a fancy, shiny, cool-looking design car might, especially if they can't produce it in time, which has been a problem.
And you guys raised the issue of, you know, fighting with CES and how many cars are showing up here. There's an undeniable, I'm sure you guys have noticed, that there's an undeniable growing sense within manufacturers that maybe they don't want to introduce something on the same day that 5, 10, 25 other things are being introduced. You know, I heard a veteran say, you know, shouting in the wind is what it can feel like when you're at these shows trying to make a lot of news with something that's cool. And so you're seeing more of them not do stuff at the shows. They do it on their own terms somewhere else. Sometimes it's the night before the show starts, like several of them were this week. Sometimes it's not anywhere near a show. You know, I always think about the Mustang launch a couple of years ago, and it was global. It was going to go global, and I thought it was brilliant by Ford. They did a simultaneous global launch where, even though it might have been midnight or middle of the night somewhere else, they had 4 or 5 different locations throughout the planet where that car was launched in like December, not near any other car show, because they didn't want to compete with car shows. They just wanted to have their own global event. And more automakers are doing that. That's the other reason we've dropped from 2.5 days of activity at the Detroit show to 1 day of activity.
It is, and you know, it's interesting. You know, Google and Apple don't go to CES for the very reason that you're talking about on the tech side. So even though we've been talking about how great CES is and it's the 800-pound gorilla, they better be careful, because when the top tech companies don't go to your show,
right,
that's telling you something.
Well, okay, so let's follow this CES thread for a minute here. So if the bright autonomous future comes to pass, if CES becomes the dominant force, will car companies introduce any new cars?
Ooh, good question.
At auto shows or at
anywhere?
Well, look.
Wow.
We're going to be driving cars.
Or being driven in cars.
No, I'm saying driving cars deep into this century. And the math is easy. It takes 20 years to turn the fleet over. So the cars that are being built in 2017 today will not go off the road until about 2037. So we'll still have cars with steering wheels in 2025, probably 2030, even 2035. You add 20 years in that, you're talking 2055, 2060 before they're all off the road. So I think it's going to happen in a long time. But I will say this, you know,
they'll be in the LeMay Museum.
Yeah, they'll be in the LeMay Museum, that's right. And you know, just if you see old cars with a crank, everybody goes, whoa, look, it's an old car with a crank to start the engine. I think the modern day equivalent of that is going to be, whoa, look at that, a car with a steering wheel.
Yeah. That one was when humans controlled them. Remember that?
Yeah. Remember when it was legal to drive?
Yeah.
So a friend of mine who always loves to buy classics and restore them and go up and down Woodward when the Woodward Dream Cruise happens, called me and he was really upset. And I think, John, he had heard one of your reports where somebody predicted that driverless cars are going to be here soon and whatever. And he was concerned because he said the manufacturers always promote and market the driving experience. What are they going to promote and market? What are they going to tell you? You can sit back, relax, and have a massage or whatever. What do you do about the driving experience? We won't be talking about that anymore.
Like I say, deep in the century before that happens.
But you're right, Murray. And one of the things that I was hearing recently from someone else, another technologist, was very interesting, which was you have to start rethinking the whole concept of a car and a personal transportation when that happens. If my priority is sleeping, I'm not going to be as worried about whether it's a Nissan or a Ford or a Chrysler. I'm going to care, is it a sleeper car versus an office car?
Is it a Serta?
We're all waiting in the hotel lobby. I'm going to go for a 12-hour drive to New York, and I need to be productive. So give me an office car, and it's going to have a really fast internet thing and a nice upright screens and all that. Someone next to me in the hotel is like, I'm going to New York too, but I've been up all night, I've been working already. I need the sleeper car. Yeah. And so you'll actually have differentiations on what the car's service provides you since you don't have to drive.
Right. Good point. Very good point.
Hey, look, guys, we ought to wrap this up now, but Karl Brauer, thanks for stopping by. Great to have you on here.
Me.
Murray, great having you as always.
Great to work with you again.
We'll have to do this more often.
Absolutely.
And Gary, you and I got to keep on doing it as well.
Next time, back in the studio.
Back in the studio. I'm all for that,
Comforts
too.
at home.
So thanks, folks, for having tuned in to Autoline After Hours.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, your journey, our passion, and by Lear, a global leader in automotive seating and electrical systems.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons, get your daily news fix with Autoline Daily, and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.